Okay, so I have traced out my body. I'm going to hold you up so you can see. I've traced out the body and I put pins in just so that the fabrics wouldn't move. And I traced out 2 arms. What you can see is that I have left open a space at the thighs, like the pattern marks. We won't sew the toes, and I've also got a space at the side, as well as the sides of the arms. So what you're going to do is we're going to completely ignore the next step in the tutorial. The next step in the tutorial has us cutting out the pattern. We're actually going to completely ignore that. We are going to do a different method which is significantly simpler. And what we're going to do is sew while it's still in one piece. So what I'm going to do is put you down for 1 second and I'll show you. I'm going to cut out the arm area so that it's easier to sew. So now what I have is a body and I have 2 arms. I'll probably cut this little section of the body off as well while we're cutting, just so that it's easier to work with at the sewing machine. I'm going to put this aside because I will want this fleece, and this fabric in the middle here would make a really cute little pocket doll. So I'm going to put this to the side, and now I have my 2 pieces. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew, and we're going to be very careful. We're not going to sew the toes. In fact, sometimes, I'm just going to do something to show you a great trick, is if you put a pin across the toe, you won't sew there. So these pins are in the center, so they won't affect your sewing. But this pin right across the toe is going to be incredibly in the way and remind you not to do the toes. If you're concerned, you can also put a pin at each of the tabs that you're supposed to leave open. You could pin here, just as a little, sorry, my arm's in the way, just as a little reminder that we're not going to sew those at all. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use a stretch stitch on our sewing machine and sew just inside the line. You can go up to 1/4 inch inside the line. If you want a doll a little bit larger, you can go right inside the line. The amount of seam allowance there isn't going to change the size significantly. Don't go any more than 1/4 inch inside the line. For sewing, let's take my machine here. You're going to want to use, ideally, a stretch stitch that's a triple. So it'll sew 3 lines of stitching. I'll keep it at 2.5, but I sometimes will make it slightly longer. If you do not have this stitch, that's okay. If you have a normal lightning bolt stitch, that will work too. What you'll want to do is make sure it's nice and short still, at least 2.5. Any much bigger and it might get too wide and too long, but you'll have to go around the body twice if you use this because it's not as strong as the triple stretch. So if you're using this one, you have to go once around and then right beside that, either to the inside or the outside, go a second time around. Okay? If you don't have any of those, you can use a zigzag. Just make sure it's as narrow as it can possibly be. Maybe not quite that narrow. Well, maybe. You want a very narrow zigzag and do the exact same thing twice around the body with that. If you have the triple stretch, only once is sufficient. So I am going to put you down for a minute and I'm going to sew around my body, and I will be right back to show you what it's going to look like. Oh, another quick little tip before I do that is I have a walking foot on my machine. That helps a lot. If you have a walking foot with your machine, I would put that on there. If you don't, that's not a problem, but if you do, that's going to be a huge help for you.